Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the fourth edition of the FreeFuse Sessions. Today, I have a friend of mine, Zac, who is a aficionado on games and how they can actually connect folks in the workplace. And so rather than, of course, doing his introduction for him, I feel like he should be able to share a little bit more about himself. So Zac, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the show.
Thank you. I really appreciate this opportunity. So my name is Zac Jarrard. I'm the president of Jarrard Consulting, LLC, and I work with organizations to help them improve engagement, productivity, and then connecting across different age groups. And across my vast experience I have over 20 years of experience bridging generational divides, so bringing different teams together of various age groups, delivering project results, and then playing video games with teams from all over the world. And it's a whole lot of fun. And I'd say outside of that, I'm really active in the community and just really happy to be here and honored to get to know Mike.
Well, that's fantastic. And I thank you for, providing that context. And, a lot of people would think in your position, like, wow, I'm jealous of this guy. He gets to work with video games and gets to use them in a very productive fashion. Not like, hey, I'm going to go play Fortnite and like, just, kind of like, wind down. We're actually in your case, utilizing games to actually bridge the gap between generations of folks. And something I've always wondered about, sort of the reason why you actually, got into this was, how was it that, was it life? Was it things that you actually saw in the workplace? Was it, research you did, through a degree? What really got you into this whole process of, multi-generational studies and bridging the gap using an approach like video games?
That's a great question. I would say it just sort of happened organically over time. I've played video games for most of my life. I've also played several board games. I used to play chess at scout camp with kids, and I remember I was amazed even at the camps I'd go to. There was one year where I brought a couple chess boards and I'd play with the scouts. I told them if they beat me, I'd buy them a soda or something, because I was an adult at that time and I had a cooler at camp, which they thought was really cool. And we had no fights at camp one year. And this is with a group of boys that are, 11 to 17. Sometimes they don't always get along, but I would say it was stuff like that I noticed over time. And then as I had gotten into the workplace, I realized that I was able to work effectively with different age groups because I'd come from a large family. So I had met people, that had grown up pre-internet. I'd had some younger relatives. So I had connected with pretty much every generation we have in the workplace today. And so I saw that I could do that, but other people couldn't do it as well. And I set out to try to find a way to help bridge that gap, because I truly believe when we all work together, regardless of where we are, our age group, we can get win-win outcomes.
Yeah, and that's fantastic. And what's really interesting is, you mentioned having a big family, right? I have, a brother, and we're separated by 8 years. So we actually kind of straddle the generational gap between like millennials and Gen Z, right? And it's so interesting too, because like, there's actually different things that he's accustomed to doing, right? And like there's like things that, not to say that I was like pre-internet or anything, but it's more like, even thinking about where we were technologically, like dial-up modems, right? There's people who don't even know what that is. Like, that noise that, used to run when you would actually do that. Like nobody has an idea of what that is, right? Or, AIM, like AOL Instant Messenger, right? And so I feel like sometimes it's equally as much when you're trying to get engagement and buy-in from folks, right? It's like, how do you actually figure out, with so much technological advance, so much different ways that we communicate, how do you actually, sort of bridge that gap? And that's why I've always, whenever I talk to you, I feel like that approach of utilizing games to almost create this shared language and shared connection is honestly such a fascinating approach. So, when you're developing these programs for folks, right? Like, what are some of the things that you feel like, you want to integrate in terms of the, sort of games that you want to provide to these people as a way for them to engage and connect? Is there a framework? Is there like a type of game that you feel like works when you're trying to, get different generations of people together and have shared meaning? Or is there some other framework that you're using that you think is the most effective for people to use?
Wow, those are a lot of questions. I'll try to answer some of them. I'd say it's always important to start with what you're trying to accomplish. In the context of the workplace, the companies or nonprofits I've worked with are usually looking to try to control cost in some way, perhaps change behavior, so develop soft skills or whatnot, or test out new ideas in a fun and safe environment. And so I think being clear on what you want to accomplish is important. And then also looking at the game design, and bearing in mind that in the workplace, we have people that are motivated by different things. Some people want to win. Some people want to compete with their coworkers. Some people just want to be there. They want to work on a team, perhaps. And so, building that into that game experience is important. And then keeping in mind that different generations might approach that game differently. So if you have a digital game, you might have older folks that aren't as used to being in a virtual environment compared to younger folks. And while that sounds like a challenge, it's also an opportunity, because that's the chance for where some of your younger folks that might not traditionally get leadership roles where they could shine, and they could help bridge those gaps and show older people the power of that technology and innovation.
So, that brings up an interesting point, right? So when you're developing, maybe this program, right? And I know that you've mentioned utilizing Minecraft before, but do you also think about trying to create games that are, sort of in-house, like something that someone would actually, sort of create? And the reason why I mentioned that is I've noticed that there's a lot in terms of the learning and engagement that people want to do in terms of gamification, right? People are trying to gamify their sales process, or people are trying to gamify rewards and benefits for meeting their quarterly or monthly goals, right? And I think that that's all well and good. I don't think that that necessarily goes into the immersiveness of a real game, right? And so maybe it's not exactly the purposes that you have in terms of bridging the gap between generations. But do you ever look at possibly creating your own game, or is it always games that already exist that you utilize?
I think that's a interesting question. So I'd say currently I'm utilizing commercial games that are already out there, because they're already really powerful tools. And then there are several of them you can customize to meet your needs. Minecraft happens to be one of them. And I discovered it on accident. I was finishing up my undergrad studies, and then I was at home sick for 2 days. And I had some friends bugging me for a couple of years. They were like, "You need to play this game." And at one point, they even built a house for me. And I was like, "Okay, I'll come play it." And I did, and I thought it was really fascinating. And then I ended up later on helping develop a graduate class based on my experience building cities in that game. And, as I had built these cities and whatnot with friends, and then later on students at a college, I discovered all the different ways you could use Minecraft. And if you look at the education edition, so a version specific for K-12 schools or colleges, there are lesson plans developed by teachers from all over the world on a broad range of subjects. But I would say, to kind of answer the other part of your question, my longer term goal is to develop my own game that I could use for training purposes.
Awesome. And I would say this, like, and even in our own experience, right? Like, with FreeFuse, right, we offer an opportunity for people to create these scenarios. And what we've noticed is people started to create these really interesting gamified scenarios. Like, for example, I know one of our users is creating a leave behind for a larger company right now. And she's creating these scenarios about how to work through a sales training, but it's not necessarily like, it's not necessarily just like, hey, go watch this video and then like we're going to do a whole bunch of like, you know, role play, which is fine, but it also means that you have to bring someone else in. You have to like sort of, you know, build in that time, and then, you know, that's, I wouldn't say it's not scalable, but in a sense, like it is going to take the time away from somebody else. But what we saw was, which was really interesting, was people started to create those scenarios. And if you actually, you know, go through the motions and, you know, make the right decisions, you actually get to move forward in the story, quote unquote, right? Otherwise, you kind of like get a bad, you know, ending, you know, sort of like the whole choose your own adventure concept. And what I find so fascinating about that is, you, by providing someone a more interactive way to actually go and you know, sort of not just train themselves but to participate in the experience, I feel like is a real fundamental part of actually getting folks to not only just engage but buy into the whole process of what they're trying to train you on and what they're trying to learn. So, you know, I've always been curious about this, right? When you're, let's just say, you know, you're bringing in some of these commercial games, right? Do you have particular outcomes or objectives as it pertains to, I mean, I'm sure you do, but what outcomes or objectives are you actually looking to create when you're bringing together different generations of folks, putting them into this commercial game environment? And how do you kind of measure or keep track that, you know, people are on track to, you know, finding ways to, you know, sort of connect and actually find meaningful ways to understand each other better?
Wow, that's another really deep question. So I think the first part of that would be, with the gaming activities I do for clients, I always start out with finding out what their goals are, and then try to frame an activity based on that experience. And then throughout the activity, a key part of it is having a game facilitator. So someone that can navigate people through that experience. And I've often found, being a game facilitator myself, that I can ask people questions and whatnot, that pulls out, you know, their strengths or stuff they're thinking about, and then that helps bridge those gaps between generations. For example, one activity I did, you know, I had a group that was building a city together, and you know, as we were building this city, I asked them, well, tell me about other cities you've been to. And we had discovered that our group that was geographically located in one area had been to cities and places from all over the world. We had one person, they were from Michigan. We had one person talk about being in Mexico City. They were talking about different regions from all across our country. And so being in that game environment created a kind of an open and fun space where, you know, all these ideas could kind of come to mind, and then, you know, you could kind of bring those out and then show people that they have more in common than they realize.
You know, and I wrote a note here down from what you were talking about, right? I find the idea of the game facilitator really interesting, right? Because what's, in my personal opinion, you know, I think that whenever you want to have a successful implementation of something, you really need to, you know, make sure you have the right pieces in place, right? And, you know, for folks who might be listening who are interested in facilitating these games or creating these, you know, shared experiences, what are your thoughts on who, you know, if you're an organization, right? When you're facilitating all of these things, who is the most likely person that's going to be heading this up, right? Is it somebody in HR? Is it somebody who's an instructional designer? Is it somebody who's maybe a learning experience designer? Or, you know, is it somebody who's maybe, you know, some other role that I might not have mentioned there? But who's your game facilitator team? Like, and how can we, you know, make sure that we're getting the right people in to get those positive outcomes you were mentioning?
That's an excellent question. I would say that, you know, looking at the team you would need to bring together that game experience, I wouldn't necessarily say that it's title based. You'd probably have someone from the HR team, some kind of manager that would be supportive of, you know, adding gamification in some process or that experience. You know, you could definitely have an instructional designer, but I think oftentimes we forget that, you know, speaking in terms of generations, with our younger folks, that a lot of them are game experts. They've spent more time than we have playing Fortnite, Minecraft, all these games. And so organizations can lean on them to help deliver some of this experience. And I think that's a key part to realize. But I also think for older generations too, maybe there are some games they've played that they're really good at. And I think it's an opportunity to bring out the strengths that people have, but then also, kind of like you were alluding to earlier, give them a sense of ownership, that they're owning that experience, so they'll bring even more to the table.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what's an interesting part about this, and something that we've even seen on our end, is game in terms of actually getting people to participate and engage, just as at like the lowest fundamental level, right? Like if we look at if I look at some of the ways that people sort of utilize our tool to create these experiences, there's a sense of creating rehearsals, right? Because they can actually go and make choices and personalize their experience and say, okay, I would do this in this situation. And then they can either give you feedback, or they can help you figure out, okay, well, you made this choice, so therefore we need to, give you this advice, right? This is more along the lines of what you need. What I've found is even getting people to, make those decisions, have that ownership and participate, also has a certain element of immersion, right? And to me, the fascinating part is whether you're leveraging, a platform like ours, which helps people, which allows the viewer to go ahead and interact with the content itself and, create their own personalized experience, or whether you're playing a board game like Sorry or Monopoly, all the way up to the most immersive thing, which is like video games or VR headsets. There is a certain level of almost getting sucked into the game, like an immersive sort of sense of, oh wow, like I'm really in this experience right now, right? And I feel like certain mediums have a higher level of immersion, but I feel like that's one of the most important aspects of getting people almost to engage and buy in. So what is your take actually on making sure that you develop, whether it's a gamification system or whether it's your own commercial game that you use to connect with people? How important is that immersion element?
I would say that that's, once you have your goal defined, you understand your players, so you understand what motivates them. You're basically talking about the game mechanics at that point, and I think that kind of rounds off the game experience as a whole. And I think it's important too to be a little careful with it, because you want to make sure your game mechanics match the outcome you're trying to get. For example, let's say that we had an accounting process and you had like a purchase card and you had to fill out a log of what you used it for. You probably wouldn't be very motivated, or you might be scared if I make a game where you're getting chased by a dragon. This dragon is going to chase you around until you fill out this purchase log. But what might motivate you more is if I give you a digital badge for turning it in early. And then let's say if you keep turning it in early, you'll get so many badges and then maybe get a free cup of coffee, or maybe like some kind of recognition. So it's important to recognize that game mechanics can be very powerful, but you want to pick a mechanic that's appropriate to the outcome you're trying to achieve.
Yes, definitely. And I think that one of the things that I think that happens perhaps in this gamification, for a while when I was in academia, right? A lot of folks were really talking about the aspect of gamification, right? And like they're like, how do we gamify what we do? Like, do we provide incentives to how people will be exploring the learning content? And I think that some LMSs, learning management systems, try to do this where they're like, oh, you've gotten points for doing what you're supposed to be doing, which is like the actual assignments and things like that. But it's almost like I feel like the outcomes or the actual game design wasn't as easily aligned with what people were trying to do, and therefore, it feels hollow, right? It's almost like gamification for the sake of getting people to engage, not actually naturally gamifying the experience in a way that's actually supposed to be fun, so that you can almost weave in a lesson or weave in an objective without it feeling like it's forced, right? So when you're, sort of crafting your own game systems, or maybe when you're crafting your own outcomes, how do we avoid trying to, well, I guess for lack of a better word, how do we avoid trying too hard to gamify things, and instead actually weave in a good outcome?
I think that's an excellent question. First, I think we have to realize that games are a tool to use in a very intentional way, which might sound very counterintuitive. And then second, to recognize that we have other tools besides games that we could use to engage and motivate people. And maybe there are instances where games are not appropriate. Three, I think there's misconceptions about the term gamification. I think when people throw it around, they tend to talk about like, oh, we're going to use a game for this and a game for that, where it might not be appropriate. But instead, a better way to think about it is, how do we engage and motivate people to achieve the goal that we're looking at, but then also achieve a goal they have that's related to it? And then fourth, I'd say, try stuff out. Start small. I think that sometimes we think too big. We're just like, oh, let's gamify our whole learning management system, or let's throw this out at the company when it's barely been tested. And I kind of think of games almost like a startup. Like, you get a team together, you get a group of students together in a class, you try something out, you iterate over time. So you look at what worked, what didn't work, and then you gradually scale it, so that way your resources are supporting the best elements of that game experience.
What's really funny about almost that mentality is, like, whatever people call it, right? Like, sometimes people call it like an agile framework. Sometimes people call it like, sort of like the startup mentality to like test and like, oh, hey, like we're gonna iterate, right? But what's really so interesting is, like, people understand the concept, but I feel like especially first time people, they are actually they feel like they need to get so much right the first time, rather than actually take a little bit of this, test out little parts of it, gather the data, and iterate. Because no matter what you think is perfect, it's not actually going to be perfect for the people once you actually expose it out there into the wild, right? And I feel like the, whatever you want to call it, agile or startup mentality of gathering data, iterating, and building things over time, it's something that we've really embraced, right? Because just like any founder is trying to launch the first version of their product. I mean, our team had our own qualms about, oh, should we release this? Are we sure that this is ready to go? And what's funny is, all the stuff we worried about, or all the stuff that we thought, oh, like, this is never going to work, or like, this is something that people are going to think is ugly, like, they happily engaged with and thought it was great, right? And then there were things that we thought, wow, that's going to be amazing. People are going to absolutely love this. Those ended up being things that people didn't even care about. And it's just kind of amusing to sort of think that, we care so much about things that almost don't even matter. And I feel like when we're building up, this whole program, or building up, let's say, this idea of how to get people to engage, which isn't just telling them to engage, but actually building something fun, inviting. I think that, it's really important to sort of keep that perspective. Like, we're not, you're not going to get it right the first time, and just being very, very comfortable with that, right? So maybe in terms of that, when people are actually developing some of these, measures, let's just say, to impact how they have workplace engagement, in your mind, right? Let's just say someone wants to, really maybe design their first program before really getting out there. What are some of the things that they should keep in mind as they're, kind of ideating, beginning that process? Where do you feel like someone should start? Where should they draw inspiration from?
I think they should start with thinking about the end goal they have. So what success could look like at the end, and then think about their end user they have. So the person they'll be playing this game, or perhaps using this product they have. And then as they go along developing it, get feedback from others. And like you talked about agile, you know, a lot of businesses now are adopting agile or trying to, you know, become more agile because, you know, they want to get feedback from their end users and then use that to be, you know, improving their products or services faster than the past, to keep up with competitors. I'd also say too, have a risk management plan. So think about what's the stuff that could go wrong? How do we address it? You know, if how we addressed it didn't work, our initial mitigation, have another backup plan, but then also think about your positive risks. So as you're developing something, what are other ways we could leverage it? And ultimately, I think at a certain point, you've got to look and say, okay, you know, this is 80% ready to go. You know, let's throw it out there and see what happens and then develop the other 20% later. And I think being iterative with it is okay. And that's also where testing is critical too. So getting a group of power testers that'll go through stuff. You know, even when I play games online, you know, one of the motivations I see is people that try to push the boundaries. And you've probably seen this too, like they'll try to break the game boundaries or whatnot. So finding people that'll do that, that'll help you maximize your chance of success and having a high quality product.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, those people are so interesting, right? Like, they're the people who like go out of their way to try and break the game. I think another part that's actually really fascinating about it too is they you know, some people call folks who, you know, kind of create workarounds, like, you know, in their own products, like they call them outliers, right? Like they're people who maybe they were actually using your product in a whole way you never even thought of, and you're like, well, why are they doing that? And then you realize, well, actually this might be valuable for other people. Let's, like, you know, create a small release of this and see if it's valuable, or let's like even just see what their use case was and why. And I feel like in the same kind of vein, the type of person who's a user there, they're actually similar to that person who tries to break the game, right? And you know, I think it's just, you know, I think that there's a certain level of curiosity and just, you know, human nature to just want to try, right? Like my favorite is when you get when you get prompted to try a beta version for a game, so you're almost like incentivized to really go in there and you know, break the game. So I think that those are just that behavior is so fascinating to me, right? And I think it's even something that, you know, someone could, you know, obviously sit there and say, well, I need to think about all the ways that someone could like break this game, but in reality, it's actually counterintuitive, or it's actually, you know, not good to do so, because you want to learn how people actually are circumventing things, because I think, in my opinion, it actually just makes a better game.
No, I think you're right. And I think in the context of the workplace, I think that, you know, it challenges how we traditionally think about work. Because in the past, we were very hierarchical. You know, you would take something to like a manager and they go to a senior manager. But the agile approach we're talking about, and then this idea of having an ownership and, you know, training or game experiences, it makes it where you're taking some of that control away from a manager and you're giving it to other people. And I think people have to realize that's okay, that people can lead from where they are, that being a leader isn't necessarily tied to a position, and that it's okay to fail. And in game environments, they celebrate failure. I mean, if I jump out of a game boundary, you know, there'll be some kind of explosion that goes off, and then I'll go back because I want to slay that dragon or get through that level. And, you know, one part that's really puzzled me about the workplace is that if you think about, we spend more time at work than any other stuff we do, than with our family or friends. And it's like, why not enjoy what we do? Now, it doesn't mean you enjoy it 100% of the time, because there's stuff that you might not enjoy doing as much that you have to do. Maybe stuff doesn't go your way, but if you could have fun most of the time and then feel like you have a safe environment to fail, you know, your organization will be more productive, but then people also want to stay, which I think especially is critical today.
You know, what's so interesting too about that is you're right. Games allow us to and when we talk about allowing people to create scenarios, we always talk about productive failure, like being able to actually productively make a mistake, right? And this is something I've always felt very strongly about, right? We spend a lot of our time, from when we're kids, even to going through like undergrad, or if you're folks like us who've done graduate degrees and things like that. There's so much hinging about being right all the time, right? You're measured, your grades are measured on being right. You do homework and it's graded on how many right answers do you have, when in fact actually failure shouldn't be necessarily shouldn't necessarily be thrown out as this completely horrible thing. In fact, when you fail at a video game, you get better at doing it, right? Like you look at some of the crazy stuff people make, like, you ever seen the Mario level creator, right? It was like super popular on Wii U. And people would make wild stuff, right? And people would be like, well, there's no way that anybody could beat this, right? And people would fail so many times, right? And then eventually, of course, they would get better, right? They might go through 100. And of course, the folks who would record themselves doing so is done for the content and for the for watching them rage out, right? But like, at the end of the day, the whole mechanism to actually getting somebody to continuously fail actually is a learning mechanism, right? Like, and all across the board, whether we talk about sports, all the way up to whether we talk about like even learning about how people use your product, or even internal initiatives, like failure actually has such a productive part of actually teaching you a lesson about something, right? Now, do you want to productively fail for things like, hey, don't stick your hand on the stove? No, you probably don't want to productively fail and figure out that it's a very hot thing you shouldn't touch. But it is important to maybe perhaps productively fail in a sort of a sales training before you go on a sales call. It's important to productively fail when you might be figuring out how to talk to someone in a crucial conversation in HR, right? Like bridging that generational gap, learning how to talk to someone in Gen Z for someone who's older, and then learning for those folks learning how to talk to an older person if you're in a younger generation. And those things I feel like can allow us to keep from not rehearsing important things that we need to do, but also having this sort of environment that keeps us that allows us to just say, hey, I can make these decisions, I can actually be free with it, and I don't have to worry that I'll have these bad ramifications if I make the wrong decision. So to me, I feel like being able to integrate the aspect of productive failure, it's actually one of the things that we consistently see as a real interest point when people make content on FreeFuse, right? This aspect of you can actually do something and feel like, oh, nothing bad's going to happen to me for a wrong decision. I can actually learn freely because I'm not trying to be right. I'm trying to explore and actually develop my understanding. And I think that's the aspect of games that are really, really special, and what really makes it as a medium so strong to actually be a teaching tool as much as it is a connection and engagement tool.
Yeah, you're spot on. And, I think starting back to your comment earlier, I think we have to realize that it's okay to let go, or to not be right, or that someone else could have an answer. And oftentimes when you tap into a team, or, you have a diverse range of associates that have, they're from different generations or different backgrounds, oftentimes you can get a better outcome. It might take a little longer versus if you just made a decision, or an individual, but in the long term, it's often worth it. And in game environments, there's this element of being able to fail fast. So you could try something out. If it doesn't work, you can persist. And, a key part that I think you were alluding to with your comment is, as you fail, you can reflect on it. So you can step back and say, I did this wrong. I need to move this way, or I need to say this so I can get that sale. And being able to do that reflection in a safe environment is really powerful, because then when you go out and you do your pitch or stuff in real life, you have a much higher chance of being successful.
Yeah, and those are some fantastic insights, if you really think about it, right? Because it gives people an opportunity to really see that you can integrate these things and avoid having to, necessarily just learn through those actual failures that have stakes, right? And so I think that this is, I think as people create better, more, engaging systems for this, understanding that, this productive failure aspect should be integrated and even sometimes even laugh about it and even celebrate it, I think is an actually really healthy thing to almost developing that aspect of not just improvement in terms of outcomes, but also even a cultural thing, right?
Right. And then there's an element of inclusion too. So like if you're a younger associate, maybe you have older associates that have failed before in the past on something. So it's opportunity for that intergenerational learning and communication to help, be successful or improve for the future.
Absolutely. So, I know we're running to time here, so I always like to give folks an opportunity to, share a little bit more about themselves and, anything that you might be wanting to promote. So if you have anything that you'd like to share with the audience, feel free to go ahead and share that now.
Okay, I really appreciate it. I think first, I just want to thank Mike for this opportunity. It's been really fun getting to know him and his team. I've seen a demo of their product. I think it's incredible. So if you've got video-based content, definitely connect with him. He's been really supportive of me and then other associates that I know. I would say in terms of the future, I'm working on a book right now. If you've got ideas or thoughts about different generations, you could feel free to reach out to me. And then if your organization, if you're looking at ways to improve engagement, productivity, or if you hear that you're having a hard time connecting with different age groups, feel free to connect. I'm more than happy to help.
Awesome. And those sound like some fantastic opportunities. We'll be linking some of those opportunities up in the LinkedIn post and some of the other promotional posts that we will be putting up, around the time when this episode will be airing. So, with that being said, Zac, I want to just thank you so much for your time. It's been a fantastic conversation. And, we really just appreciate all the insights that you've provided today. So for those of you, watching or, perhaps listening at home, we thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to seeing you in the next FreeFuse Sessions.